I am absolutely sick of watching an endless feed of TikToks, Reels, and whatever they're called on X. Most of which are videos I'm not interested in that are fed to me by the almighty algorithm. So I'm going to replace them with this. If you've watched this channel for a while, you will know I am a keen user of this, the 7th generation iPod Nano. In fact, I've made a couple of videos about it already. Primarily, it's used as a music player for running, but recently I also tested to see if you could still use it to track running. If you want to see that video, you can do so up here, or is it up there? I used to know which side it was, I get it wrong all the time. My plan is to put content on this device to replace TikTok. So rather than spending an hour watching a bunch of videos that I don't want to watch, I could spend an hour watching a TV show that I know I like. So I know what you're thinking. This screen is absolutely tiny and it's going to be useless for video. Well, you might be right. But if, like me, you use something like this, the iPhone 12 mini, you will already be used to a device with a smaller screen. And in actual fact, when you're using this in its landscape video mode and this in its portrait mode, like on YouTube, the viewable window is actually about the same size. And I see loads of people do that all the time. Obviously, you're not going to get the addition of comments and stuff below the video that normally plays on a YouTube video, for example. But in terms of the actual content, it's basically the same size. If you've got a bigger iPhone, obviously there's going to be a bigger difference. But for me, it's going to amount to roughly the same as watching a regular YouTube video in portrait on my phone. Obviously, the resolution of the iPhone is far greater than that of the iPod Nano. This is basically 240p. Which isn't very good, but I think at this size, resolution's kind of a moot point. The other thing to mention, at this small size, aspect ratio becomes even more important because if you've got something that's 4:3, you're going to get black bars either side, and if you've got something that's 21:9, like a movie for instance, you're going to get black bars across the top and the bottom. So the actual viewable screen is going to be far smaller. The iPod is also missing a speaker, so you're going to have to connect either headphones or a standalone speaker, but you can do so using either Bluetooth or a headphone jack, which is not something that can be said about the iPhone. Battery life is also going to suffer on something this small when you're watching video as opposed to music. Normally I get about 5 hours on the iPod Nano using music, but I expect that to drop significantly when I'm watching video. Having said that, the battery in my iPhone mini 12 is knackered, so not very good either. So at least this way I've got 2 batteries that I can deplete rather than just one. So how do you actually get video onto this thing? Well, it's simpler than you might think. There are 2 main ways. The first one is basically in the same way that it was intended to work originally. You can use the iTunes store to download content and then you can sync that to your iPod. Yes, believe it or not, the iTunes store does still exist, but it is now broken up into several different places. Video now sits in the Apple TV app on a Mac, and then music is in the music app, and podcasts in the podcast app, and books in the books app. Basically, each thing sits in its respective app where they've broken iTunes down into several applications. When you fire up the Apple TV app on a Mac, there is a store section on the left. When you click on that, this is where you can purchase or rent new movies or TV shows. Any purchases that you previously had will show up under movies or TV shows depending on what they are. I've got a bunch of stuff that I purchased back in the day that I can easily sync to the iPod. Or at least most of it. I did try a few TV shows and a few movies that for some reason got this error message to say that they couldn't sync, and there's no real reason as to why that's the case, or at least it's pretty vague in the error message. You will need to download each piece of content so that it's stored locally on your Mac before you can actually sync it to your iPod. It won't sync directly from the cloud, for example. Bear in mind that depending on the age of the program, they will be a mixture of 1080p or 4K, and obviously those file sizes are going to differ depending on the quality. Even at HD, a TV show is not going to take very long to fill up the 16 gigabytes of memory that is the maximum storage capacity of an iPod Nano. An hour of content from the iTunes store will take up about 500 megabytes of storage space, give or take. So if you take something like season 4 of Mythbusters, which I've got here, that probably isn't going to fit on the iPod because 30 episodes at 500 megabytes is going to max this thing out, and on average they're probably slightly over. Syncing those items is as simple as checking the box to say that you want to store it on the iPod, and assuming you've got space, it's going to sync pretty quickly. The second option for putting content onto your iPod is by making your own. Now, I'm not talking about shooting your own content directly like I am here, although I have done that and it does work. I'm talking about maybe ripping DVDs or Blu-rays using something like MakeMKV. If you're choosing this method, then most of the work is in the ripping itself, and I'm not going to go into that in this video, but there are plenty of videos out there that will tell you how it's done. After you've ripped the content, the syncing is pretty much the same as it is from the iTunes store. You just need to import the content into the Apple TV app first, and then you can sync the content across to the iPod. Something to note, however, is regardless of whether it's a TV show or a movie, it's going to go under films in your iPod. It's not going to differentiate whether it's a TV show or a film. It's just going to go in films. If you are making your own content, you might want to consider reducing the file size. I mean, you could rip it to 480 or even 360p, and by the time it's down at this size, it's still going to look as good as if it was 4K or HD. Remember, the maximum resolution of this is 240, so anything above that, you're not really going to get the benefit of, but it will take up more room on the iPod. Okay, so I'm just editing this video now, and I'm talking about reducing the file size so that you can fit more videos onto your iPod. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're making your own, then you need to do 240p maximum. I tried several video formats and nothing but 240p as a maximum would actually go onto the iPod. So I talk about 480 and 360. Basically, you need 240, otherwise it won't go on there. In fact, I had to download an old version of Handbrake so that I could use a legacy iPod setting, which gave me the correct settings so that the aspect ratio was maintained and it output at 240p. This is missing in newer versions. So just bear that in mind when you're ripping your own stuff. You need to do a 240p file, and just make sure that you check it, because the first one I did at 240p, the aspect ratio squashed it. If you're using stuff that you'd purchase from the iTunes store, then it seems to do an iPod friendly version when it syncs it to the iPod. But maybe that's why the ones that won't sync don't. Okay, back to the video. You could also choose to download YouTube videos using one of the numerous downloader apps, or you could sail the high seas and get your content that way. Whatever you feel comfortable with, but essentially the process will be to import into Apple TV and then sync to the iPod. Ultimately, all of this could be done on your phone. You don't have to use an iPod Nano or any of the other iPod generations that play video, but there's always going to be the distraction of other apps on your phone, whereas the iPod's only going to give you the option to watch the content that you've already synced or just call it a day. You're not going to get sucked into the whims of the algorithm. Let me know down in the comments, is this something that you would do? Go back to a dedicated video playing device like an iPod? Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.